Hello everyone, my name is Gideon Gribeno. I'm from South Africa and I think I'm becoming a game developer, almost by accident. When I saw my first Unity tutorial just over 3 years ago, I had no idea and no plans for things to progress to where they are now. But here we are, and it's been quite a journey, to the point of me entertaining realistic thoughts about my game's early access release supporting me, my wife, and 4 kids, financially for at least the next year. But let's start at the beginning. First off, I'll give my personal background and how I eventually stumbled upon game development. Then I'll go into a bit of detail on the development process of my game World Turtles, and what I've learned, or rather am still learning. Finally, I'll try my best to provide some words of wisdom, which I hope will be useful to some of you. My first encounter with computers was when I was 12 years old, when our school got its first computer. We got one at home shortly thereafter, and the fairly simple games of those times kept us entertained for hours on end. But there was one game that stood out. It wasn't quite as simple, that could pull you into another world even for days on end. Sid Meier's Civilization. I fondly remember how my older brother and I took turns playing and sleeping during holidays. Yes, it was entertaining, but it was a lot more than that. I probably learned more about our world and how it functions, playing the various installments of Civilization, than quite a few years of school education combined. It was so vast, it brought together so many concepts into one experience, and your decisions and actions made it all work, or fail. I'm pretty sure most of you know the feeling I'm talking about, although you may be thinking back to various different games. And while you may play more modern, better looking, brilliant games later on in life, I don't think anything can hold a candle to those first experiences. But it wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't long before I was actually programming, too. I started writing databases and text-based user interfaces for whatever my father was busy with at the time. And in high school, I first met Logo, which also features a turtle and very basic graphics. But we worked mostly with Turbo Pascal. Yes, it was text-based. Yes, I'm that old. I once attended a show of a local musician who told the story of how he wasn't really a social person. While the other kids were going to the movies, hanging out wherever, doing all kinds of social stuff, he was mostly in his room, practicing, playing guitar. Then he said, with a sigh and a look of resignation for comic effect, that he became quite a good guitar player. It was very similar for me. I remember how I searched for examples of how to turn Turbo Pascal into a rudimentary graphics engine. It wasn't long before I got 320 by 200 resolution going, and I could get and set pixel colors. I coded my final school year project in 320 by 200 graphics, rather than the text-based application everyone else was using. It was a huge overkill for the project, but I also learned a lot. This actually introduced me to assembly language, and I soon had the simplest of sprites moving around on the screen. I remember how I had to save the background the sprite was moving over, and restore it when the sprite left the area. It never actually occurred to me that drawing everything from scratch every frame was even an option. It was just too slow, especially when I started moving into larger resolutions. I still remember how exhilarating it was just to get 640 by 400 to work, and how it seemed like so many pixels. But I could never get it to render fast enough, and system memory ran out very quickly. I was probably doing it wrong, or at least inefficiently. And while I kept writing nerdy little programs throughout my life, the graphics side was always where I ran into problems. But then I started university, and this little chapter became a dead end. At least for now. I've had a really good career of 2 decades in a quite technical arena of credit risk management. And I've spent the last 6 years running my own one-man consultancy business. I had one big, stable long-term contract, and people I'd work with in the industry kept asking me to help out with smaller projects. So I've been really fortunate in that I'd managed to put together decent savings and investments. But I became increasingly, I think the best word to describe is disinterested with the work. Years ago, I was eager to get things done, to try and get the best out of every situation. But lately it became a real drag, and I certainly wasn't enjoying it anymore. In February of 2019, I saw a Unity tutorial for the first time, and I couldn't believe that software like this was available for free to any nerd like me to just play around with. So I started tinkering. First off, I gathered some free assets together and developed a little cabin scene. I spent a lot of time on the weather and other visual effects, a few joints, flickering flames, and adding some sounds to certain events. I also devised a random flying script for birds, bats, and other flying creatures, as well as a procedural sun and stars script, and these two became my own first tutorials on my YouTube channel. I uploaded mostly educational videos on maths, science, and some other random ideas as a means of learning how to use Unity to visualize certain concepts. I was thoroughly intrigued and motivated about something again, and definitely not disinterested. Then one day I came across Cat-Like Coding's brilliant hex map tutorial. I was about halfway through it when I just had to skim over the rest of the sections. Then it hit me. With this as a base, and the ideas already starting to flood through my mind of how to adjust and expand on it, I could indeed one day make a decent game. While there was still a whole lot of questions and uncertainties, it seemed to me as if, with enough effort, the graphics part of the puzzle was finally solvable. And I already had a big part of the idea for the game from another little nerdy Excel-based game I concocted about 9 years before. And that day, the adventure of World Turtles began. I again found myself at the start of an exciting game. A game filled with ideas, concepts, senses, and techniques that I had to learn about, adapt, and bring together into one whole. Only this time I wasn't playing it, I was developing it, and it was just as exhilarating. While I did encounter some parallel processing in my job, I now had to take it to another level. I realized that if I wanted a proper size map with hundreds of units on it, I would have to push as much of the processing as possible off to parallel threads. I had to learn about GPU instancing, how shaders perform their work, how different textures, normal maps, lighting, shadows, and a host of other things impact performance. I had to learn how to spot an optimized asset, and what exactly to look out for when evaluating the different building blocks of a game. If even one of these factors are grossly inefficient, it can severely decrease your frame rate, the stability of the game, and the amount of content you can add. Figuring out all these things was actually quite enjoyable, and it felt very rewarding to see the impact on frame rate, stability, and the look and feel of the game, as I kept revisiting and refining factor after factor. Of course, it's very seldom that one person does all of this completely by themselves. I've had the pleasure of working with some very talented people, implementing the sound, deciding on music tracks, and even commissioning one, the icon and cover art commissions, the handful of assets that I bought, and periodic adjustments to 3D models. I've had people helping me along the way with various bits and pieces, and I'm grateful for the positive impact this has had on the game as a whole. It feels to me as if my lifelong interests in visuals, sound, mathematics, physics, and the power of good games, as well as what I've learned in my career, are all coming together in World Turtles. I may not be able to do all of it myself, but I've now become confident that I know or can quickly learn enough about all of it to put it all together. What I find most appealing about game development is also one of the hardest things about it. The extensive variety of skills, knowledge, experience, and involvement required to bring everything together into a meaningful, enjoyable whole that can teleport you to somewhere else for a while. there's certainly no room for being disinterested. So, what advice would I have for other game developers? I'm going to go through a few points, expanding on some while only mentioning some of them briefly. We don't have enough time to discuss all of them in detail, but I will be in the Discord server if anyone wants to ask me any specific questions or discuss anything further. Please just tag me so that I'm aware of it. Let's start with one that could be viewed as being a little negative, and that is be realistic and try to base your reality on concrete measures. I've not mentioned it before, but I've actually ended my long-term consultancy contract when the people I've worked with left that company. And I've shied away from any new projects in my real career for the last 6 months. I'm also planning on doing so for at least the next 6 months. So I'm actually already working full-time on World Turtles. Somehow, I've already become a game developer. Not a successful one yet, but getting there. We've been living off of our savings, and while my wife is a bit more stressed than I am about it, she supports me in this endeavor. A chance like this does not come along every day, and I just know that I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't give it a full go. I may forfeit a year's salary if it goes horribly wrong, but the opportunity of working on this game for another year or two and having it become financially viable is something I'm willing to place that bet on. However, I didn't jump into it blindly and with unrealistic expectations. I started working on World Turtles as a nerdy hobby and slowly increased the time I spent on it while decreasing the time I spent on income-generating projects over the next 2 years. The more I saw the potential it had, and the more wishlists increased. For example, in June of 2021, World Turtles was selected as the industry pick in the Pitcher Game Awards, beating out around 5,400 other game pitches. Things like these make me hopeful that there really is potential in this game. Unfortunately, just being passionate about one's dream game is not enough to make it financially viable. I think you need to prove to yourself in steps of increasing size throughout the process that your dream game is viable before you bet a large part of your potential income, savings, and career progression on it. One big part of this is marketing and many of the associated non-game development functions of bringing a game to its audience. We'll get to this a bit later. A second part is proving that you are both capable and willing to put in the work required to get to know the technicalities of the arena that you're playing in and get to know it very well. Slapping together a bunch of tutorials and game assets is very seldom going to cut it. What helped me immensely is the fact that I had loads of technical programming experience, even though it wasn't in game development. That enabled me to very quickly realize when some tutorial or methodology I was evaluating was good quality in terms of efficiency and good practice. So I did not waste a lot of time on tutorials, scripts, and forum answers that weren't actually applicable or suitable to my situation. And here's one that's probably even more important. Large parts of your eventual code base will be based on tutorials or answers to questions on forums. However, make sure you actually understand those bits and pieces and how and why they work. Challenge yourself to identify places where you could make improvements or add on something specific to your game. Make these borrowed bits your own. Pull them apart and put them back together. In this way, you learn from them, rather than using them to only try to fill gaps in your knowledge or experience, while the gaps actually remain. Next, it's not always going to be plain sailing. While developing a game has lots of rewarding returns, sometimes you need to struggle for 4 or 6 hours to figure out why something small but extremely important just doesn't work the way you want it to. You also need to be willing to do this when it's required and important. It helps when you can clearly define the things you should be spending time on, things that you know will eventually make it into the game, so that you don't spend too much of your time on things that turn out to not be applicable in the end. I'm glad to say that I've always had a fairly clear general roadmap for World Turtles, and very little of my time had been wasted like this up to now. So, let's get to the marketing and associated non-development side of making a game. I'm really not an expert in this field, but it is something that I've identified very early on as extremely important to be doing from very early on. I made available a rudimentary demo as soon as I had something half decent, and it's been available and improved upon ever since. Now, there are pros and cons to making a demo available, so I can't tell you which is better for your specific situation, but I felt I wanted one. It also gave me something to pivot my marketing on, but screenshots, videos, and sneak peeks could work just as well. I would say get your Steam page up as soon as you can. You need a place to send interested people to, and the Steam page works quite well, while you can start scraping together wish lists. Alternatively, create a Discord server and use that as your base. In the first 14 months of my demo being available, I managed to scrape together slightly under 4,000 wishlists, probably mostly through Reddit posts and some other social media. It felt, and it was, painfully slow and took a lot of effort over the months. Here's what I recommend from my experience. I'm going to refer to Reddit, but you can apply it just as well to other avenues. Forget about dropping and ducking, where you just plop a link and an image into Subreddit, where hundreds of others are doing the same thing. Rather identify a handful of applicable subreddits that would actually appreciate your effort. Make sure about the rules of each one so you don't violate them. Then rather post fewer, higher quality posts, and be prepared to truly engage whoever is interested. Exposure you get in this way is worth a lot. Along the way, you'll meet some passionate fans giving you some valuable feedback and ideas. You may also meet fellow game developers, and most I have met have been rather friendly and helpful. Even if you form only a few good relationships in this way, these relationships may lead to a lot more positives in the future, both in terms of exposure and just having someone who's in the same boat or has been in the same boat in the past to ask for advice or opinions. A quick aside, there are also loads of events, competitions, and groups to take part in, but many of these bring in next to no real exposure or relationships. So try to gauge beforehand which seems worth the effort. Additionally, as you gain exposure, you will be contacted by various people offering their services around various aspects of your game. Some of these will be easy to manage. For example, you should be able to know whether you need a composer for your game, or someone to help you optimize your Steam page, and it merely becomes a question of what you are willing to pay for these services. However, since this is my first time going through this process of bringing a game to market, there were, and still are, a lot of industry knowledge and experience I'm not even aware of yet. So, I decided I would accept many of these requests for meetings and use them to educate myself. Even if I never actually work with most of the people I've met in this way, the meetings were mostly very pleasant experiences, from which I ended up learning a great deal about how the industry functions. I'm sure this will help me significantly in the future. Let's talk about the product for a bit. For a few months during this 14-month demo period, I actually stepped aside from marketing a bit and focused on improving my product. I'd already proven the concept and the engine of the game, and I felt it needed to focus on adding content and mechanics, improving visuals, and just being able to offer a better quality product. So my posts became limited, but more impactful. Then, through one of these relationships I'd built up over time, I managed to be included in the Earth Appreciation Festival on Steam, and I was pleasantly surprised by the outcome. In the 2 weeks during and after the festival, my number of wishlists jumped by over 60%. I am convinced that a big part of this success is due to the focus I placed on improving the quality of my product. You're going to need luck to be on your side, and sometimes it will be. When that time comes, be sure to have something good to show it. I am now convinced that I only need more exposure for World Turtles to become financially viable. I am participating in the June Steam Next Fest, which will hopefully take me over my initial wishlist target for early access release. Of course, the more I can exceed my target, the better the chances of really hitting it off properly. So I'll be doing what I can to get more exposure. I have reached out to some content creators and have had limited success, although I've received confirmation from a couple of influential ones that the game is on their radar. My main aim for the next few months will be content creators and events, especially ones that feature on Steam. If I can somehow be successful on this front, I have no doubt that I'll be able to work on World Turtles another year at least. So if you're a content creator, you know what to do. Thank you for listening to my little story. I hope you could gather something useful from it. And meet me on Discord server if you'd like to discuss anything further. Also, if you're interested in World Turtles, please consider wishlisting the game and joining my own Discord. You can find the links on the Steam page and in the demo. Goodbye.